Have you ever been asked a question and suddenly your brain just disappeared? Someone says, "What do you think about this?" And you know you have something to say. You've thought about it before, but in that exact moment, nothing comes out. You stare at them, you say, and then you start talking, and somehow 3 minutes later, you've explained absolutely nothing. Or maybe you've had the opposite experience. Someone asks you something you genuinely don't know, and instead of admitting it, you start making things up. You use complicated words, you talk faster, you add unnecessary details, and deep down you're thinking, please stop asking questions before they realize I have no idea what I'm talking about. Here's the good news. You do not need to know everything to answer almost any question confidently. In fact, some of the most impressive communicators aren't impressive because they always have the answer. They're impressive because they know what to do when they don't. And that is a completely different skill. Because confidence in communication isn't the ability to always be right, it's the ability to stay calm when you might be wrong. Think about that. When someone asks you a difficult question, what happens inside your body? Your heart speeds up. Your mind searches for an answer. You become aware of yourself. Suddenly, you're not just answering the question anymore. You're thinking, do I sound intelligent? What if I say something stupid? What if they judge me? And the moment you start trying to protect your image, your ability to communicate gets worse. It's like trying to walk while constantly looking at your feet. You become so focused on how you're performing that you forget what you're actually doing. So the first skill you need is incredibly simple. Stop treating every question like a test. A question is not an exam, it's a conversation. And that tiny mental shift can completely change the way you respond. Imagine you're in a meeting and your manager asks, "Why did our customer retention drop last quarter?" You don't know. The insecure response sounds something like, "Well, I think it might have something to do with the recent changes, because we did see some issues with engagement, and maybe the customers weren't happy with. Notice what happened. You started speaking before you started thinking. You're trying to sound like you know, and ironically, that makes you sound like you don't. Now imagine you simply say, "I don't have the exact numbers in front of me, so I don't want to guess. But I can tell you what I think may be contributing to it." That sounds different, doesn't it? You didn't become smarter, you simply became honest and structured. And people trust that. There is tremendous power in being comfortable saying, "I don't know." But there's an important distinction. "I don't know" should not be the end of your answer. It should be the beginning of a better answer. You can say, "I don't know the exact answer, but here's how I would approach it." Now you've transformed uncertainty into competence. Because competence isn't always having information. Sometimes competence is knowing how to find information. Think about a doctor. Would you trust a doctor who confidently gives you an answer about something they've never seen before? Or would you trust the doctor who says, "I'm not certain yet. Let me examine this properly before I tell you"? The second person sounds more confident precisely because they aren't pretending. And that brings us to the second skill: buy yourself thinking time without looking nervous. You are allowed to pause. Let me repeat that. You are allowed to pause. Some of the smartest answers you will ever give will begin with silence. But most people are terrified of silence. Someone asks them a question and within half a second they say, "Well, basically, why?" Because they believe silence makes them look stupid. It doesn't. Panic makes you look uncertain. A calm pause makes you look thoughtful. There's a huge difference. Try this the next time someone asks you a difficult question. Take one breath, then say, "That's a good question. Let me think about that for a second." That sentence does something beautiful. It gives your brain permission to work. And while you're thinking, the other person is no longer wondering why you're silent. You have explained the silence. This is especially useful during interviews, presentations, meetings, arguments, and difficult conversations. Because your goal isn't to respond quickly. Your goal is to respond clearly. Fast is not the same as confident. Have you ever noticed that when you're nervous, you talk faster? You think speed will help you escape the moment. But communication doesn't work that way. The faster you speak, the less time your brain has to organize your thoughts, and suddenly your sentence starts here, and then somehow it goes over there. Then you remember something else, and now you're halfway through a story nobody asked for. Slow down, breathe, think, then speak. You're not being judged for taking 2 seconds. Most people won't even notice. And here's something even more powerful. When you pause before answering, you are communicating something without saying it. "I'm not afraid of this question." That is presence. Now let's say you genuinely don't know the answer. This is where the third skill comes in. Instead of trying to answer the question directly, answer the question you can answer. Let's say someone asks you, "Why did this company fail?" Maybe you don't know the exact reason. You could say, "I don't know the specific internal reason, but businesses usually fail for a combination of things like poor cash flow, weak product market fit, or bad execution. I want to look at the company's numbers before making a specific claim." That is an intelligent answer. You didn't fake knowledge. You gave useful context. You separated what you know from what you're assuming. And this is one of the biggest secrets of articulate communication. Don't pretend certainty where there is uncertainty. Say what you know. Say what you don't know, then explain what you can reasonably conclude. That structure alone can make you sound dramatically more intelligent, because your brain doesn't need to manufacture an answer. It simply needs to organize reality. Here's another example. Someone asks you, do you think artificial intelligence will replace most jobs? That's a massive question. Nobody can predict the future with certainty. So instead of pretending, you could say, I can't predict exactly what will happen, but I think it's more useful to ask which tasks AI will replace rather than which entire jobs will disappear. Jobs are usually collections of different tasks, and some of those tasks may change much faster than others. Look at what happened. You turned an impossible question into a better question. And that leads to the fourth skill. Learn how to clarify the question. Sometimes you don't have a bad answer. You have a bad question. Someone says, why are you struggling at work? What does that even mean? Are you struggling with productivity, your manager, your workload, your confidence, your relationships? Before answering, you can ask, what part of work do you mean? That is not avoiding the question. That is making the question answerable. And incredibly intelligent people do this all the time. They don't rush to answer vague questions. They make the question clearer first. You can say, when you say better, what do you mean specifically? Or are you asking what I personally think or what the data shows? Or do you want the short answer or the full explanation? Those questions are powerful because they prevent you from solving the wrong problem. Imagine someone gives you a map and says, get me there. You might drive for an hour, but where is there? Before you move, you need a destination. Communication works exactly the same way. Clarify the destination before you start driving. And there's one more skill that will completely change the way you answer difficult questions. Tell people how you're thinking, not every thought, the structure behind your thought. For example, instead of saying, I think we should hire more people. Explain, my main reason is that the current team is spending too much time on repetitive tasks. If we remove that pressure, they can focus on higher value work. Now your answer has a spine. People can follow it. And when people can follow your thinking, they perceive you as clearer and more credible. This is why great communicators often sound simple. They aren't necessarily thinking less. They're organizing more. Think about the difference between a messy room and a clean room. The clean room doesn't contain less furniture because furniture magically disappeared. It simply has everything in the right place. Your ideas are the same. You don't always need more knowledge. Sometimes you need better organization. So when someone asks you a difficult question, try this simple mental framework. First, pause. Second, understand what they're really asking. Third, separate what you know from what you don't know. Fourth, give the best answer you can support. And finally, if you don't know, explain how you would find out. That last part is incredibly important because imagine an interviewer asks, have you ever worked with this software? You haven't. You could say, no. End of story. Or you could say, I haven't used that exact software, but I've worked with similar systems, and I'm comfortable learning new tools quickly. If I needed to use it here, I'd start by learning the core workflow and then practice with real examples. Which person sounds more capable? The second one. Not because they lied, because they showed adaptability. And that's what people are often really looking for. When someone asks you a question, they aren't always testing whether you know the answer. Sometimes they're testing how you think, how you handle pressure, how honest you are, how curious you are, how quickly you recover when you don't know something. And that is why you should stop trying to look like the person who knows everything. Become the person who can handle anything. There is a huge difference. The person who knows everything is impossible. The person who can stay calm, ask intelligent questions, think clearly, admit uncertainty, and find solutions. That person is valuable anywhere. At work, in relationships, in interviews, in leadership, in everyday conversations. And maybe you've been judging yourself too harshly. Maybe you think, I'm just not good at speaking. But perhaps you don't have a speaking problem. Perhaps you have a pressure problem. You know more than you think. You just don't give yourself enough time to access it. So the next time someone asks you something and your mind goes blank, don't panic. Take a breath. Look at them, pause, and remember, you don't have to know everything. You just have to know what to do next. Maybe the next step is answering. Maybe it's asking a better question. Maybe it's saying, I'm not sure. Maybe it's saying, let me look into that. Maybe it's simply taking a moment to think. That is not weakness. That is communication maturity. Because confidence isn't walking into every conversation believing you have all the answers. Confidence is walking into the conversation knowing that even if you don't have the answer, you'll be okay. You can think, you can ask, you can learn, you can adapt, and you can come back with a better answer. So stop trying to become someone who always has something impressive to say. Become someone who can make sense of the moment. Someone who doesn't rush. Someone who doesn't fake certainty. Someone who listens before answering. Someone who can say, I don't know, without shrinking. Because sometimes the most powerful answer isn't, here's what I know. Sometimes it's, I don't know yet, but I know how to find out. And once you truly believe that, difficult questions stop feeling like threats. They become opportunities. Opportunities to think, opportunities to learn, and opportunities to show people who you really are. You don't need every answer. You need the confidence to handle the questions.